Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Mike from GrowersHouse.com. So today in front of me, we got a bunch of quick fill bags from FloraFlex. In front of me is the O2, which is going to be the mesh bags. We also have this standard quick fill bags in plastic. All of these are 1 gallons, but they do come in 2, 3, and larger sizes as well. These are really cool. We really like using these, and we like recommending these recently. Just to go ahead and open these up to take a look at them. So this mesh bag is nice because it is not too thick. It is pretty thin. I don't know if you can see that, but it does allow light to pass through. It's very thin, but it is pretty strong. So that's going to allow that good air infiltration, allow you to get good drawbacks, keep you from getting any weird anaerobic spots at the bottom of the pot. The one thing that I absolutely love about these is the emitter holes. So these are drilled with the central hole for whatever you're going to transplant. When you see these blocks being hydrated, you'll be surprised at how fast and how evenly they go ahead and get hydrated. One cool thing about these bags too is they kind of initially they create a nice boundary layer and hold all of that moisture in. So when you're filling these bags, you're not going to lose a lot of that water. Most of the water you apply is going to get into that cocoa brick and hydrate it. So you can see the volume of the bag is pretty small when it's packed down. They come in cases of 20 when they're 1 gallon sizes. Now this is what they look like when they're hydrated. As you can see here, pretty full. This is, as far as volume goes, slightly larger than 1 gallon. It's about 1.2 that we've seen, which is great. You know, you get a little bit more cocoa than you expected. This is a good mix of both cocoa coir and fiber. This is going to give you a consistent water holding capacity of about 60%. And that's nice because then that allows you to time your irrigation, plan your irrigation so that you're not either over irrigating, but you're making sure that you're getting full saturation of your root zone every time. These, like I said, come in that nice mesh bag. You're not going to get any anaerobic weird spots at the bottom. The cocoa itself is nice and tight in the bag. It's not like really loose. And as it fills and as your plant grows, it'll kind of create a nice solid base on the plant as well, and it won't tip over or anything like we've seen with some other bags out there. Like I said, they do come in both the plastic and the O2, which is going to be the mesh. We really like the O2, especially if you can get your environment under control. It just allows a little bit more steerability, a little bit more control over the dryback, and we do like the darker pots too in certain rooms, certain setups. So these 1 gallon pots will come 20 per case. You can get them either in case, pallet, container. If you're looking for those larger sizes, that is something that I would definitely recommend for commercial cultivators or someone running a large farm, because the amount of savings that you'll get on labor filling pots with these one-time use mesh bags, it's astounding. So if you are a commercial customer and you want to get bulk pricing, or if you want to find out how to run these types of bags at scale, you can click on the commercial link up at GrowersHouse.com or visit us on the consulting link at canacribs.org. Thanks for watching. This was Mike with Growers House. Remember to keep on growing, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Intro. It's time to let the words flow off the tip of my tongue and let my thoughts grow. Like a seed in the soil is planted. So like a forest, my brain's enchanted with the visions of peace and brotherhood. Another brother labeled another hood. Ideals of unity forever lost. If so, who pays the cost? Humanity. That's who pays it, but we'll go broke if we continue to raise it. The cost of living rises every day. The cost of giving, well, who's to say? Growing up.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. My name is Marco Jimenez. Here we are, last day of January 2024. Who can believe it? It's amazing. We're off to a good start here at Growers House. I wanted to quickly just welcome you all to this new, relatively new initiative that Mike Chang and I have brought to the table here at GrowersHouse.com. It's one of our new educational platforms that we have, in addition to the Canacribs side, in addition to the Growers Network side. We're now doing these webinars every month. So we're super happy to see you all virtually. we welcome you all to please participate in these webinars. This is it's a live event, so for those of you that are here live right now, you can ask any questions you need answered about anything in the cannabis industry. We are going to be focusing specifically today on the difference between the pros and cons between using pre-filled pots and not pre-filled pots, and all the fun material and matter and medium that goes into them, cost savings and whatnot. But you're welcome to ask any other questions throughout the webinar. Anyways, nice to meet you all. For those of you that are new to the Growers House webinars, my name is Marco Jimenez. I'm the director of content here, video production content here at Growers House and Cannacribs. I direct and produce the actual Cannacribs show with Nate. By the way, quick shout out to all you Cannacribs fans out there. We can't thank you enough for all the support over the years. I've been directing for just about 2 years now, and we've watched the channel grow. And thanks to all the work my predecessors had done, we are already at 277,000 plus subscribers with over 31 million views and 6.3 million hours watched, which is just incredible. These are amazing numbers. Can't thank you all enough. Nate says thank you. We're super grateful. Keep on watching. We're bringing you guys some new episodes this year. We are in talks with a couple of farms on the East Coast, a couple of really big hitters here on the West Coast. We're hoping to crank out at least 7 or 8 episodes this year. It takes a lot of work to get these up and running. As you can imagine, pre-production takes a few months. And then once we lock in the farms, we start moving. So anyway, stay tuned on the Cannacribs channel on YouTube for that. Also, to announce a couple of other YouTube channels in case you guys aren't aware of, we have the Growers House YouTube channel, which is basically all about the products. There's a little bit of a deep dive in there. Mike and I shot some videos last year that cover almost all the gamut of all the best items that are available on the website. And then these webinars all are living on another YouTube channel called Cannacribs Research and Development. So if you Google that or throw that up there in YouTube, you should be able to find all of these webinars. And if you're interested, I can send them all to you as well. Email me, marco@growershouse.com. I'd be happy to follow up. So let me get a little bit into this webinar. This is the Growers House Ag Solutions webinar featuring our Cannacribs Tech Advisors with Mike Chang, Batt and Joe Artim. In this 1-hour webinar, the guys will explore the difference in efficiencies between using pre-filled pots versus traditional pot filling methods. Stick around to the end of the webinar. We have a new little system here that does random winners. Four folks from today's webinar basically are going to win 4 4-ounce sample bottles of this new VPS cloning gel product that we just launched last week. So we will draw those winners at the end of the webinar. I wanted to point out a couple more things about our Growers House and Cannacribs. We're here to bring our audience and customers the highest quality, up-to-date information and education on top of the line products, cultivation practices, facility build-out planning, new cultivation SOPs, and general information to help aid in the success of you guys, the cultivators. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn on all these guys' cameras, and then I'm going to bow out and see you guys later on in the webinar to do the webinar giveaway. So Mike, Will, Joe, welcome. I'm going to go ahead and leave it to Mike.
All right. Thanks, Marco. You just popped right out there. Okay. How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to our webinar series. Thanks for joining us. This is a pretty important topic that we, as all the TCAs, wanted to cover. That's why we're all here today. Will, thanks for joining. Joe, thanks for joining. I know you guys are busy.
Good to be here with you, Mike. Thanks, Marco.
Awesome.
Stoked to be on the call, guys.
Cool, man. So now that Marco has given us all our intros, let's just dive right into it. So filling pots versus pre-filled bags. This is like kind of a pretty big topic coming up these days. Oh, let me get these slides going. And there we go. Cool. This is a pretty big topic coming up these days, especially as a lot of these like more mature cultivations are starting to find ways to really find efficiencies in their CapEx or their consumable expenditures, things like that. This is one thing that I've always tried to lean towards, especially in indoor environments. Like Will and Joe, like what is your experience right now as you guys are in your respective like parts of America, and what are you seeing as far as like trends on what people want to move towards?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I work with many different sizes of cultivations, Mike, and it's when we've got some of the micro cultivators that are running 100, 200 plants, the difference between hand filling pots and compressed media, there's a little bit less of a need for that labor savings. But once you get to mid-size and larger cultivations, when you really start to look at the uniformity that you get from the compressed media, as well as just the absolute labor savings, it's a no-brainer solution, and that's where I would say that most large-scale cultivations, if they're still running coco coir, have moved to these compressed bricks.
Got it.
I would agree with
East
that.
Coast, Joe. Yeah.
East Coast out here, I would say 60 to 70% of folks are pivoting to pre-filled expandable cocoa bags.
Yeah.
Another big aspect to that is potential for labor saving and also storage. So a lot of folks can't give up the space to bring in large pallets of already expanded cocoa, take the time to load the bags, unload the bags, fill the pots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And the pre-filled pallets come $2,000 per 1 gallon pot and $1,380 per 2 gallon pots. So yeah, it's a big space saver as well.
That is a good point, especially for you up in the East Coast when it's like cold and rainy a lot of the year, which is just like mold city for pallets of soil outside. So that's a good consideration. And yeah, especially on the space savings, 2,000 individual pots for plants in the space of a 4x4 pallet is pretty dope.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we often see is storage space is the last thing that's considered when building out a grow facility.
Yeah.
And we all love to have, at least a nice loading bay to hold some product because, as we saw through the pandemic, serious supply chain issues. And that's where, being able to stock, a month, 2 months, ideally 3 months of your media and nutrients on site is so crucial just to make sure that you're never skipping a beat.
And for me personally, that's a good opportunity for the client to then negotiate better pricing. Like you really shouldn't be paying full price because you're buying a case or a pallet here or there. You should be getting these things in, quarterly allotments or whatnot so that you can really make those purchases and freight efficient.
Well, and that's just it, freight, Mike. And that's like the other big piece is like, think about equal amounts of loose fill cocoa versus this compressed media. Yeah. The difference in freight cost is pretty huge. And so, once again, many savings between freight, space, labor for moving towards the compressed media.
Right. So one thing that I like to use a lot when I try to explain why I like to use these compressed cubes is kind of like a side-by-side math equation where it's like certain things between the processes of filling pots and certain things in the processes of just hydrating pre-filled pots is the same. Like you're going to lay them out on the tables. You're going to irrigate them. You're going to have someone come through and transplant into them, and then you're going to irrigate on top. But the main differences that I've seen in the compressed cubes versus loose filling pots is you don't fill the pots and then you don't maintain the pots at the beginning and end of that part of that SOP. So just by removing those two labor steps, I mean, have you guys seen any real world examples of how removing the filling pots and removing the cleaning of pots just dramatically cuts down on labor? Because I have a couple of examples, but I'd be really stoked to hear any from you. Will?
Yeah, man. I mean, so one of my previous facilities, we were running compressed media, and I was basically getting labor metrics, just trying to see exactly how efficient it was in comparison. Because when we did get acquired, we took on national SOPs, and we were given the guidance that we had to go back to hand filling pots. So I was trying to make a case to go back to compressed media because it was so efficient, it was so easy, and it also kept my staff so much happier. Which is the other big portion is, if you don't have a pot filling machine, which, those you're talking $15,000-$20,000 for a pot filling machine, and then a whole other, large amount of space to be able to manage something like that. So oftentimes, even these large facilities are still hand filling pots if they're doing loose media. What we saw was for the compressed bricks, really it's just taking the cardboard boxes, popping them on a cart, taking them down to your grow room, laying them out on the table, putting the irrigation stakes in those pre-drilled holes like you showed in that pre-video, Mike. Mm-hmm. and we were averaging about 10 seconds of labor per pot.
Per pot, okay.
Yeah, per pot to get those on the table and get them picked. And then from there, it's, fertigation technician goes in, they turn on your irrigation, set it, forget it for 30, 40 minutes while those start to saturate. Now we were hand filling fabric pots, 3-gallon fabric pots. And filling a fabric pot does take a little bit more time than filling a plastic pot, where you can just scoop that plastic pot really easily. But we were averaging about 1.5 minutes per fabric pot. And that's basically preparing the loose cocoa, typically in the larger bin, where, oftentimes a lot of people also just pot dry. And that's where I was trying to get my staff to pre-moisten that cocoa so that we're not drying out the tender root hairs of those clones as we're planting them. So pre-moistening the cocoa, scooping and filling those bags, loading them onto a cart, moving that cart down the hallway, loading them on the table, and irrigating. We were at about 1.5 minutes, so 90 seconds per pot. So we're talking about 90% labor savings. Next, and that's not even if you're using plastic pots, then you have to assume time to clean those pots as well. And then just the drop in morale for your staff of going in and filling pots every day when they want to play with plants. That's not what they want to be doing.
And honestly, like your physical human labor should be allocated towards the most complex tasks. Like if you're having them do menial tasks that take up a large amount of minutes, a large amount of labor hours per year, then maybe that's something you need to either automate or innovate out of, because it adds up, dude. 90 minutes or 90 seconds versus 10 seconds. That's pretty huge, dude.
As someone who's been on those teams and oversaw those teams, I can definitely say firsthand experience, folks do not want to do pot filling more than one day ever. Yeah.
The amount of employees that threaten to quit when put on pot filling duty.
I've seen a pot washing. People hate pot washing. There's
that's even worse.
Water everywhere. No one gets the right gloves, so their hands are in bleach water all day, So, if we could just so that's hazardous. There's also dust on the pot filling and the hopper side. Another consideration with pot filling machines, if you're at a large scale, is that pot filling machine always in operation? It's only paying itself back when it's running. If it's not running, then it's just actually taking up real estate. So
the initial investment on the hopper, plus the space that it takes, plus the preventative maintenance, it all adds up.
And honestly, one of the last things before we move to the next slide is the uniformity. So I know that the Floraflex or like the Botanicairs or any of those like pre-filled compressed cubes, they typically have very good lotting systems, and you can get like consistent batch over batch over batch. When you're mixing it and hand mixing it yourself from pallets of loose soil that have been sitting around, I'm sure there's some consistency issues. Have you guys seen any weird stuff like that happen?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're filling pots by yourself, there's always going to be inconsistencies within the media that you're using itself. The pre-filled bags with the lots attached come with COAs for heavy metals and other inconsistencies. So you can know at least that batch is all going to be uniform, especially when you're hydrating them as well.
Yeah, and the COAs is a good point too. I mean, that kind of helps move us right over to the next slide here, is like, what is in these compressed cubes? There is a lot of types out there. There's Rio, there's so many different ones out there. Like, usually from my experience, it's usually like chip, fiber, and just pith. Pith could either be called cocoa coir, or in like certain companies like Floraflex, they call it cocoa peat, but it's basically coir,
And touching on that, Mike, I think that's a big misconception. A lot of cultivators that are used to running like 70-30 cocoa peat loose fill, cocoa perlite. They believe that without the perlite, they're not going to have drainage. And so, they get really concerned about that. But that's where it's that right ratio of the cocoa peat with the chip that does allow for the drainage that we want.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing on the market right now, the compressed bricks either come in 60% water holding capacity or 45% water holding capacity. Mm-hmm. The 45%ers are usually the more coarse chip. And the whole brick is usually composed of that. The 60% is usually a finer cocoa core and has a higher water holding capacity. So when you are hydrating those pots, definitely take note of what water holding capacity you have, because that really comes into play when you're doing your initial hydrating and then when you're crop steering later on.
Especially even pot size selection too. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where like some cultivators do really prefer that, 52.5% or 45% water holding capacity, because they are able to steer a little bit better. Those pots will dry out much faster. And so especially if they're moving up to a larger size media towards like a 3-gallon bag running something like the 45%, they can still get some pretty fast dry back on those larger pots.
Yeah, and in my experience, I've actually seen it's a little bit more like a slower dry back, because when they have like large rock aggregate like perlite, I feel like it's like you're starting to dry back and you're dry. Whereas with the chip, it's like it's a little bit more gradual, because the chip kind of actually holds moisture and releases it too. So
it aerates and it holds the moisture at the same time. It's
exactly, yeah. So it's not like just like perlite where it's just like, okay, we're getting dry and now we're dry.
Yeah, it gives that initial rooting time a lot. It quickens up that initial rooting time when you first transplant.
When you get that air in there, yeah.
But that being said, it's all dependent on the cultivator, because running, the 60% water holding capacity in the fabric pots, you'll also get some pretty fast dry back. And so it's, balancing the water holding capacity with the size of the media, and then, how large your plants are in your irrigation strategy to really find the solution that works best for you.
Cool. I mean, okay, so Joe, you mentioned heavy metal testing and stuff. So I know for a fact that like all the companies that GrowersHouse or most major retailers work with have or can provide COAs. I think one of the important things about the compressed cubes is how inert they are, and you can kind of trust that COA, because like if you get a fungal pathogen-free test on compressed cubes, that's probably good for the life of those cubes until you hydrate them. You can't really guarantee that in a pallet of soil that's been sitting out, or even a pallet of cocoa that's inert. Stuff is going to grow in there. There's carbon and nitrogen in that bag. Like things are going to grow. So yeah, like as far as like COAs or testing, what advice could you give like people trying to select different brands?
I know that one of our partners is partnered with Michigan Institute of Toxicology. They provide COAs with every batch that they manufacture, and they test for mercury, lead, cadmium, chromium, and arsenic. That is the new standard. Some labs out in California omit chromium, but they're probably going to be adding that in as well. So you can rest assured that any products that you're acquiring or you're planning to use will come with a COA, and you can request those as well for your order.
Cool. Yeah, that's pretty important, eh?
A lot of folks definitely are concerned about heavy metal accumulation, especially since cannabis is a bioaccumulator. So they want to ensure that their cocoa is clean, or at least below the detection level for those heavy metals.
Right.
Yeah, and Mike, you touched on how inert the compressed media can be, and I think that's another major point, is that it's a completely dry product. There's no moisture in that cocoa, and so there's no moisture to allow things to grow. Whereas I think we've all seen bags of loose fill cocoa or soil blends, things like that. If it's either left out in the lot or goes from hot to cold swings, whether it's shipping or poor storage conditions, since there is some moisture left in there, that's when you can see mold blooms, and that's when you can see things start to grow, and things that we do not want to bring into our facility. Whereas I am yet to see a compressed brick that has introduced anything bad into a facility that way.
Yeah, same. I mean, I've seen pallets of like really, like it seemed like a good pallet of ocean forest at a retailer in like the Bay Area, and then you go turn around and there's like mushrooms growing out of the back, and you're like, I don't know how hot or cold that soil is now. Like, as far as the bags or like the what the compressed cubes come in, they typically come in like a mesh or a plastic. Have you guys seen like huge differences between the two? I like to recommend the mesh, because like you said, the 60% in like a 1 gallon, it's almost like running a 6-inch rock wool cube. It's super steerable. Like, what are your guys' thoughts on plastic versus mesh?
Well, I think environmental conditions are one. If it's an indoor cultivator, 100%, especially for smaller media, I definitely recommend mesh. It's great to get that air pruning with the roots, not get as much strangulation and, rooting around the outside where water does start to pool. However, I live out here in New Mexico where we do have a good few greenhouse producers. And we might be averaging 15, 20% humidity in the wintertime. And so in that case, we might go for the plastic bags and shoot for like 3 gallons, 60%, because our goal is we want to retain moisture. Otherwise we're drying out too fast. So I think it definitely does depend on the cultivation style and the conditions.
For sure. Yeah. The environment will definitely dictate.
I would agree with all that. It's site specific and location specific, and also fertigation style specific. So we recommend you guys reach out to us if you have any questions.
Yeah, you guys see a lot more stuff, especially you, Joe, on the East Coast. You have a lot of established like outdoor guys. I know New Mexico, there's a ton of outdoor guys, even living soil guys. So I totally understand that your guys' methods of running these types of compressed cubes are probably going to be way different. For me in Arizona, a lot of the times, most of these growers are indoors. So that's why I like that 60% water holding capacity and those 1 gallon, 2 gallon cubes, because it's like, I could either run rock wool, you could run this. I got an irrigation strategy that I could program into your thing for either, and they're basically the same, which is
nice.
I
mean, I think you nailed it. You can steer it just like rock wool.
I would say most of the folks that I'm working with out here are running the 60% either mesh or plastic, and that really depends on their fertigation strategies.
What size?
1 gallon typically. I do have a few partners that are on 2 gallons as well.
Yeah. I found that for guys that really can't laser focus their irrigation practices, so like if you have like either a system that can't do short pulses, or you have too many rooms and you're direct inject, so you can't do multiple pulses, getting that 2 gallon in there kind of like definitely gives you that old school cocoa time buffer on dryback.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cushion and definitely a fail safe. And then also how much water you can move at one time comes into play as well. So if you have a system that you can only water one room at a time and your feeding schedule is really tight, then that will help you out with that.
Yeah, then you start having to crank up your dripper emitter a gallon per hour, and then just like shorten the time. You're gonna have to play with volume more than you are with time, unfortunately. Yeah. One thing that I know we get asked a lot, and I'm gonna just jump straight into this one, is buffered versus unbuffered when it comes to either cocoa, compressed brick, or any of these types of quote unquote inert medias. I have generally had the best success with unbuffered cocoa type medias. Triple washed with EC below like 0.5, 0.6 is fine, typically, in my opinion, as long as that 0.5, 0.6 is just like calcium, magnesium, sodium, basic stuff, no heavy metals. What is your guys' experience between buffered and unbuffered, and what do you guys typically recommend?
I work with folks who prefer either or. I try to recommend the unbuffered just so they can know exactly what's going in for that initial hydration. Yep. I've also noticed the initial hydration is a bit quicker. Sometimes the buffered cocoa can be a little bit hydrophobic and take a little bit more time to hydrate, as well as the bottom layer may not get fully hydrated.
Yeah. You get that like tuck on the bottom of the brick, but it looks still good. You're like, what the heck? Yeah.
It's just like the salt crystals kind of like all go to the bottom, and it takes a couple waterings before you can kind of get that to break up.
To really soften up. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Joe really touched on a good point, is that, when we're using buffered cocoa, what are they buffering it with? All of this cocoa is produced in, India, Sri Lanka, some in Vietnam. And oftentimes when it is buffered, you have these massive mounds of cocoa that is, sitting outside, and they are basically just spraying, some cheap calcium nitrate on it.
Right.
Whereas with an unbuffered product, you can just hydrate it with your feed solution. If anything, maybe bump up, your calnite if you have the ability to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other big piece is, the pollution that can come from buffering in these big cocoa fields.
Yeah.
You're just spraying this fertilizer, which is then running off into wherever, into the environment in India. And
That's
Sri
a good point. Not a lot of people know the process by which all of these things happen. And we unfortunately have the knowledge of knowing like exactly how these things are processed. And yeah, it can be like buffering it doesn't help the manufacturer. And in my experience, and it seems like in your guys's, it really doesn't seem to help the growers as much. And I totally agree with both of you. It's better to know exactly what you're putting down in an inert media so that you can adjust it. I typically say veg plus on the calcium nitrate. So if you're like a 1 part, 1 part, 1 part, just move that calcium nitrate up to like a 1.5 part, just to fill the CEC with a little bit more calcium. You might want to do that with your magnesium sulfate or add some magnesium sulfate too to get that magnesium in there, So yeah, I totally agree. Choosing your own solution. What do you guys typically recommend on the watering and on the initial feeds in these types of bags?
For unbuffered, I've been recommending 1.8 to 2.2 veg mix for initial hydration. Once the cocoa has been fully expanded and completely hydrated, you may want to hold off on your following feed for a couple of days just to kind of let those roots set in and let that plant kind of take off.
Intro. It's time to let the words flow off the tip of my tongue and let my thoughts grow. Like a seed in the soil it's planted. So like a forest, my brain's enchanted. With the visions of peace and brotherhood. Another brother labeled another hood. Ideals of unity forever lost. If so, who pays the cost? Humanity. That's who pays it, but we'll go broke if we continue to raise it. The cost of living rises every day. The cost of giving, well, who's to say? Growing up.
Got it. Right. So you're not doing it the other way where you're letting the roots chase.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's with unbuffered.
But also,
yeah.
And making sure to also have a watering instep. After hydrating the cubes and then planting the clones, also running your irrigation or, hand watering on top, just to make sure that those clones are properly seeded within the media.
Right.
Yeah, no air pockets.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So run some irrigation after you do the transplant as well. I always like to tell people, especially in these cubes, since they're so inert, do a little sprinkle of like something nice, like trichoderma or stash blend or something like that, just to get it into the roots initially. So as those roots push out and they push out sugars, they'll get colonized by those Mike.
What I would even have my team do is, we were, I think we were using Recharge at the time, but now I have some cultivators using the stash blend, where basically just make a like an aqueous solution and spraying it on the roots, directly on the roots of your clone tray, right before transplant.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's got some kelp in there and everything. Help a little bit of elongation and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, either dunking the tray right before transplant or putting a little pinch in that pot right before you plug that plug.
Oh, nice. That way you're doing it all in one spot so you don't have to do it in the actual flowering room. That makes sense.
Yeah, you're not adding one extra step during that transplant if you just dunk the tray before.
We're all about removing those steps, man. I get that.
Back to the labor saving.
Okay, so last quick point here, I think, before we kind of wrap up and turn it back over to Marco, is the importance of turnover procedures. So, like, that's one thing that is part of that equation on the pot filling side is like you got to empty pots. And if they're plastic pots that are worth saving or you plan on saving them in your business plan, then you have to allocate labor, time, energy, consumables to maintain and clean those pots. And then you have to store those pots. I mean, generally between filling pots and using pre-filled pots, what differences in the turnover procedures do you guys see? Is it just in a difference in efficiency, or is there other beneficial or negative aspects?
I'll let you take this one first, Will.
Yeah. There's many different facets to it, Mike. Obviously efficiency is the big piece that we're talking about today. We're talking about a huge labor saving, but within that, each of the steps, it's, for one, it's prepping the pots, it's filling them, And then, upon harvest, if you're using plastic pots that you're reusing, you then have to knock that media out of every single pot. If you have a room of 2,500 plants, it's 2,500 pots that you're knocking the media out of into a dumpster or grinder or whatever you're doing for waste disposal. And then you have to wash those pots. And I would like you to find one facility employee that has had a great time washing pots. There's ways to do it. Once again, you can get an expensive, industrial dishwasher or something like that. I've seen people that will soak them in bleach solution and then pressure wash out. It's a lot of time and it's a lot of energy to maintain these pots. Fabric pots, disposable fabric pots can be a little bit easier, but like we said initially, filling them can be a little bit more of a pain. You don't have this rigid structure to just scoop your cocoa with. You have to we're using like ice scoops and things like that to fill these bags.
And you got to really pack them in too, or else the plants.
Yeah, and then you got to tamp them on the table several times, make sure that it's well filled, and then with that, you have the inconsistency of the your labor. And so oftentimes you get people that are filling those right to the brim, even when you're telling them, let's leave a watering lip. And then you go to water them in, cocoa splashes on the table. It can be kind of a mess.
To add to all that, the initial investment on a plastic pot or even a fabric pot, you're adding to that end cost.
True.
Whereas a compressed brick, the bag's already on it. You literally just set it, expand it, transplant it. And then like Will just was saying, when you're transferring a pre-filled pot or a filled pot to a table, when it's just an expandable brick, you're literally laying out the brick and it's hydrating on the table. But when you're pre-filling a pot and moving that pot to that table, I can't even say how many times I've seen just complete pots just fall over on the table, and that's a clean table just starting out dirty already.
Right.
Yeah. Also,
I just want to bring up a good point that Joe just said is people don't a lot of the times regard the cost of the pot as an ongoing consumable. Like, dude, you only get 2 or 3 cycles out of that pot before it's either too cracked, too old, too covered in salts, and they're going to spend way too much time to clean it. So like, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to buy these pots this one time, but my media cost is only going to be this. Because, dude, half that year goes by, you're going to need to buy another entire round of pots, because they're just going to crack or break in normal use. They can't not. So, yeah, that's a great point. Sorry, Will, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the big thing is also to all of you tiered cultivators out there, especially tiered veg, bless you for taking those 3-gallon fabric pots and moving them to the 3rd tier. That sucks.
We love you and we feel your pain.
Whereas taking a box of 20, 1-gallon pots and just chucking it up to the guy up there to lay out on the table that's
a huge point too. Yeah. It's like vertical farming. It is much more easier to use that than loose filled bags. Yeah, because it's just like a box and you shuk, and you're done. That is a huge point. Yeah, I never even considered that. Most guys I know in vertical are using rock wool, but like I said, a lot of indoors.
Yeah, because it's easy to move.
Yeah, exactly. And it's inert, no spillage anywhere. Yeah. Well, awesome. I think we went through most of the points here. We're doing pretty good on time.
One other thing we forgot to mention was your methodology of hydrating. We do recommend using the emitters to hydrate for that initial hydration, but we have seen folks using like a flood and drain method. If your tables do have the capacity to flood and hold that solution there for the brick to kind of expand.
Like in veg trays and stuff.
But the downfall of that is you may experience a little bit more cocoa waste on your table.
Yeah. True. They do make those up. Go ahead.
Mike. That also depends on how how those pots are made, because like the fabric pots, they're not really gonna run any cocoa out on the table. Even like I think it's Floraflex has like the 1-gallon 60% plastic. It's like small perforations instead of big cut holes, and so it does stay pretty clean if you are doing like a flood system.
Companies like that also have like the little 1/4-gallon cubes, which are really cool for veg, because they are basically enclosed with a single plug hole, so you could just like stack them up on a flood tray real tight, and then just do like a flood veg, which is nice. And then the roots can exfiltrate, so you just throw those into a 1 or 2 gallon when they're ready to go.
Yeah, depending on your veg setup, if you are limited on space, you may want to consider those half-gallon or quarter-gallon cubes.
Yeah.
Kind of saves you on space, saves you on transfer time, the amount of weight that you're moving. The plants aren't as big,
Yeah.
A lot of options.
Alrighty.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That's amazing knowledge. Sorry, I cut out a little quick at the intro. Good to see you guys again, Will, Joe. Amazing information. I think our audience has a few questions that we'd like to go over. Actually, there's one comment here. Jeremy Brown mentioned, looks like he's doing 3% peat, 3% perlite, and 3% vermiculite as a base, then adding compost, minerals, I guess mite. I don't know how you pronounce that. Mite.
Yeah, mycorrhizae. I'm sure you meant mycorrhizae.
Yeah.
That's like a moi blend. Like if you got the money and you need to build a living soil, like that's a pretty good base right there.
Yeah, and that's where it's also like, I don't want to completely just sit here shitting on loose fill. Like there's a place for it, especially like the smaller boutique cultivators, where you're not dealing with 20,000 plants, on a given day or week. You have the ability to have more control and create your blend. I think that when we're talking about these massive labor savings, of course it still applies to the smaller cultivators, but when you are of a smaller scale, you have the ability to really craft the system to your exact wants and needs.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah, we may be a little biased on the commercial level, but there's always room for other styles, other methodologies.
Absolutely.
I know living soil guys, like I know guys growing in beds even in Arizona, and that blend that you put right there would be pretty good, man. I think Jeremy, I think that blend is a good blend if you're doing like a living soil pot or a no-till bed or something like that. But if you were at like a giant indoor scale, it would be rough because there would probably be a little bit of inconsistencies in that blend pot to pot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and adding all that perlite and vermiculite without a mask, like we saw in that video earlier.
Yeah, always wear your PPE when you're mixing your base ingredients in a loose blend for sure.
Yeah, I mean perlite, the perlite dust, but even cocoa dust.
Any dust. Don't
dude, sneezing brown into the tissue after
the brown boogers are a bummer.
But we've all been there, man.
When dealing with that dry fine material.
So we got some questions from Steve here.
A lot easier said than done. So we always forget the mask. But Steve Hernandez has two quick questions. It looks like he's heard a rumor about ocean forest being too hot and burning seedlings. Is that a myth, or what do you guys? What's your take on it?
Can be.
I think it's batch to batch.
That's the problem. I thank you. It's the consistency, because I could say that this lot is hot, but I've seen lots of ocean forest where after a couple of irrigation cycles, there's like it starts to lose all of its phosphorus out of it. So, certain lots can be hot, certain lots can be less hot. I've had certain lots that had like cactus junk in it, and certain lots that were beautiful and fine and didn't hurt my hands when I used it. So it's the consistency that's an issue to answer that, I feel.
It really comes down to the vendors' SOPs, and I would bet that most of them have piles outside, kind of fermenting till it hits the point that they're looking for. Then they bag it up from there, and those bags go on a pallet, and those pallets sit outside. So, yeah, it's tough to say.
The other thing is that, with seedlings, I've seen a lot of people plant into some of these, already charged soils without much issue. But it's, were you feeding nutrients into this, or were you feeding just water? Because when you do have a soil that already has some nutritional value and you're planting, young seedlings, I would probably just be going with pH'd water.
Right. If the soil is if it's an actual soil, right?
Yeah.
This brings up a very important point. And maybe another webinar, testing your soil before you move forward.
Yeah. I mean, at a certain scale, that makes sense. But for like a smaller grower, I understand. And like, good rule of thumb, I think, is what Will said, in my opinion, is just don't fertigate if you're popping seeds in like a amended blend, like a compost amended blend of soil. If you're popping seeds in that, just water it until you get a couple of real leaves. Like the plant will tell you that it's hungry. It'll new growth will start to come in yellow, and then you can start to feed it.
I mean, I'll tell you what, Mike, I just use those pre-filled flats of the Organi plugs for seed
Yeah,
rods.
me
They
too.
already have a very light nutritional charge to them. I pretty much water right up until transplant, with just water. And they rock. They're great.
They're nice because they stay moist for quite a bit, so you don't have to like keep checking your freaking thing constantly, and they're very consistent. I do like that.
Yep.
One other question from Steve about potting soil. This is the old fish under the plant thing. So I mean, it works, but like I said, that is a whole different thing from commercial cannabis cultivation. I think as far as like inert scale, like if you were doing like an organic or a living soil farm, that would be a great way to amend your beds maybe as the season turns over.
Yeah.
But be careful, because you can always get weird anaerobic spots when you're doing techniques like that. You can always breed spots of weird growth, and a lot of those juices can leach up if you over irrigate. So one, it's just be careful when doing stuff like that.
If you got some leftover fish, you can also look online to some recipes for creating your own fish emulsion, which can be a little bit more of a tried and true and more replicatable method of using the nutrients from that fish to feed your plants.
Slice it up. I would say slice it up, dry it, and then just grind it into whatever compost.
Yeah.
Shout out to fish shit fertilizer. That's also available at GrowersHouse.com.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, guys. And thanks, Stephen, for asking those questions. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us today. Looks like Zach has a question. What's the biggest transplant? Are they only for clone size? Are you guys, what that could mean?
It kind of follows the same rules as any transplant into any pot. I mean, you could transplant, if you can get a mother-sized plant in a clone, if you can grow it in a clone-sized pot, you can transplant into a 1 gallon. I would say for the 1 gallons, if the question is more like, what should I expect from the sizes? If you were doing like a clone or a small up to 18-inch plant, and then you wanted to flower that, then the 1 gallons would be great. If you have vegged out plants that are either 18 to 36 inches, then probably better to do like a 2 gallon or a 3 gallon, in my opinion. What do you guys think?
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I guess I'm a little confused on the question, but just to say, you can plant a clone directly into, like we were saying, one of those 1/4 gallon veg cubes. To start with that, you could plant a clone into a 1 gallon. You could plant a clone into a 2 gallon. It just, depends on how you're going to irrigate it after that.
Yes,
you're not going to, if you plant your clone into the 1/4 gallon, that's going to dry out a lot faster. Whereas if you plant it into a 2 gallon directly, you're going to give that some time to dry before your next irrigation event.
And that
it's going to take a while for it to root in. But.
Right. And that time equates to less kind of drivability. When it's a small cube that dries back, you can dry it or you can fertigate it to lower the EC, fertigate it to increase the EC. When it's a large pot and a small plant, you really got to wait and be very mindful of not over applying, not under applying or anything like that, because the changes will be a lot longer because the volume is so much bigger.
Yeah, and also dependent upon your crop plan, how long you plan to veg, how long you plan to flower, how big you want your plants, what's your planting density. A lot of variables in that one.
Right.
Yeah.
And it looks like there's a couple questions in the chat we can quickly run through really quick. In your experience, guys, what's the largest size expandable pots? I guess he's referring to, it looks like Daniel Siegel is referring to the at the top of the webinar when we were looking at the prepackaged cube. What's the largest, I guess, you guys have ever seen? Is it 2 gallon?
5 gallon?
5 gallon is the largest that I've seen for compressed.
From Floraflex or from,
I think the Botanicare Coco Pro has a 5 maybe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think maybe Char might have larger sizes.
Yeah, and Rio Coco has a 5 gallon as well.
I'm going to be honest, if this is a 2-season, if it's a 3 to 5 month plant, I want a bigger pot with soil probably. What do you think, Will? Like, I know this is kind of more your expertise in New Mexico, but at that size, I'm growing kind of like a 1-season fruit tree is the way I kind of look at it more. What do you think?
Yeah, if you're growing a monster plant like that, that's where, maybe going for loose fill and, increasing the size of your media might be the goal. I mean, you could grow a very large plant in a 5-gallon compressed media,
sure.
but you're going to need to be irrigating that pretty frequently.
That's the thing, and you got to irrigate pretty. You're going to have to make sure you're very consistent on feeding, and you're going to have to make sure that you're delivering a very kind of almost like an inert EC at that point, which is can be costly if you have a lot of plants like that.
Yeah, man, and that's where it's like, once again, going back to trying to be relatively agnostic about loose fill versus the the compressed media. There's a lot of micro cultivators out here in New Mexico that are limited by plant count.
Right.
And so, when I'm getting in with them early on, it's, okay, we're not going to cram these plants in a small facility. Let's spread these out. Let's grow some bigger plants and let's upsize your media. Mm-hmm. Let's make the most out of those 200 plants that we can with that license.
Right.
And so in that case, we would go towards, maybe like a 5 or 7 gallon media to maximize the size of those 200 plants.
Right. And, honestly, if you're in something like a 3 to 5 gallon compressed cube that has been watered or that has been expanded, there are other techniques that I've kind of recommended sometimes, like side dressing in the pot with, lime or whatever, what have you, the things that you need in that root zone as you measure the leachate and you're like, oh, dude, there's like not enough calcium. So you just kind of sprinkle some dolomite around the tops where the irrigators are. So there are ways to kind of run a longer plant in an inert media like that without having to liquid feed so much.
Totally.
Killer. Okay, great. What else? Looks like Steve is kind of talking about his growing in coco coir on his next run. Super appreciative of all this information. Mad respect to you guys. That's awesome, Steve. Thank you again for joining us. Daniel Siegel, you already answered that one, right, Mike? About going from.
I think Jeremy has a question. I'm not sure how I feel about this. What about planting a 1 gallon fabric pot into a bigger fabric pot? You can do it. Totally can do it.
Oh, yeah.
Just put it right in
ones
there.
like Floraflex that are nice and thin but strong. You'll see roots exfiltrate, and as soon as you start to see like the second round of roots exfiltrating, that's when I usually recommend to drop into a bigger pot.
Do you ever recommend cutting the bottom out, or you just let the roots do their thing?
No, the roots will do their thing. The one thing you will have to do, so say you're going from a 1/4 gallon Floraflex cube, and you vegged into that, and it's like a 12-foot or a 12-inch plant. When you put that into a 1 or 2 gallon, I recommend that initial center hole where the transplant goes, just take a handful out, put that 4 gallon pot in or 1/4 gallon pot in, and then put that leftover loose fill on top of that so that you don't really see the fabric if at all possible. You can just lay them directly on top like a rock wool on top of a slab, but sometimes you can get an issue where they kind of fall over or they start to lean or whatnot. Just get it kind of sunk in there and get a little bit of fresh cocoa on top of it, like rehydrated cocoa on top of it, and you should be good to go.
Mike, actually one style of that I have seen that has been really interesting is with some of these living soil cultivations. Like we were talking about some living soil beds or larger, like 30-gallon living soil pots. Where, just for efficiency, they will run more of a salt-based or liquid organic nutrition and veg, and they will run the compressed cocoa cubes. And oftentimes it will be fabric. And what I've even seen some cultivators do is using like a really nice bread knife, just slice off that bottom centimeter of the pot, lay it directly on top of their living soil beds. And then when harvest time comes, they can just take that same bread knife, cut right at the point where they, it had rooted in, and they pull the main root ball right out.
They're trellising, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's really cool. Yeah. It's like a
so
modular.
many ways to rock it. But
yeah, especially you guys in New Mexico. You guys are pretty good at the living soil stuff.
Yeah, but as you said, it's like not necessary to cut off the bottom. It'll root right in. That's more of just for an ease of keeping kind of clean living soil beds and not leaving any.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Because the fabric does take like 3 to 5 years to kind of fully degrade away.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for that, guys. I don't think there are any more questions from anybody on the webinar, but I do want to know who you guys are picking for this year's Super Bowl. Are you Niners or Chiefs?
I see one more question, Marco.
Oh,
Jason Cox.
My bad.
Grow sea green as many plants as needed. Would you top or not?
Yeah, you always want to top, especially in a sea of green, I feel.
Yeah.
The point is to get as consistent of a canopy as possible.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of growers leaning towards quick veg, quick flowering times, and least amount of touches. So in that case, no top. But for a nice, consistent, even canopy, consider topping for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Clean-
trellising.
clean
Never forget
scissors.
trellis. Yeah.
Clean scissors and trellis.
That's right. Clean those scissors. No HLV here.
Nope.
Make sure you always clean your tools.
For the
With
Super
bleach.
Bowl, I don't know, Marco. I'm gonna lean Chiefs by 3.
Ugh.
Yeah,
Not
it'll
because
be.
I'm a fan of the team though.
Yeah, it should be a good one. I'm from the Bay Area originally, so I have to go with Niners this year. But
Yeah, I gotta go with Niners just because I'm so butthurt about the Eagles season this year.
I was rooting for Detroit, man. They needed that. They needed to get in there. Poor guys.
all right, Mike, you're the last one. What do you think?
I didn't even know that was going on this month. I thought it would happen in January. Don't they happen in January? Like, I don't know. This
February, Mike.
I think
February.
the sports team is going to win for sure.
Yeah.
It'll be the sports team.
Okay,
As long as everybody has fun, then they all win.
all right, guys.
That's true. As long as the ads play, then America wins.
Wings and beer.
Man.
It's football.
All right. So let's do this giveaway. I've got a 1,000% off clone gel giveaway here. We've got 4-ounce bottles we're going to be giving away to folks here that joined us today or have signed up for the webinar in general. Let me spin it really quick. Let's see who those winners are.
Oop.
Drawing 4 winners. All right.
Hey,
Alfred Haney. Musang Namsum. Sorry, I can't pronounce that. Sebastian Dam and Steve Hernandez. Hey, there you go, Steve. You guys are getting some free cloning gel coming your way. Can't really see it on my screen there, but congratulations. That's amazing. And yeah, sports ball. There's Sarah. Chiming in.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Thing to note with that cloning gel, Marco, is that's a higher IBA percentage than most of the major brands that are out there. I've been rocking that cloning gel myself and have had some awesome results.
Yeah, it's like 0.05 compared
Yeah.
to the 0.03. Yeah.
Yep.
You
Exactly.
can really just put a tiny dab on there.
Oh yeah, Joe's got some.
Yep. The background doesn't love it.
Yeah, so that's one of our new products. No dyes. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, it's unadulterated. You guys will be. We're going to be doing a little Super Bowl commercial. We're launching this year at the halftime, but it's only on social media. So it'll be our cannabis industry version of a Super Bowl commercial. I guess that's pretty much it, guys. We're wrapping this one up. Another amazing hour of knowledge, and love all the guys, everyone that showed up today. Thank you for being a part of this. Do you guys want to add anything else? Maybe the best way to get a hold of you or anything like that? Any shout outs to your folks out there?
Mike at cannacribs.org. If you got any more questions, feel free to hit us up. We are
Mike at cannacribs.org, Will at cannacribs.org, and Joe at cannacribs.org. Or, if you guys get onto the Cannacribs website, you can typically fill out a type form on there, and one of us will chat with you on your project.
We have local events coming up too. Stay tuned. I'm sure we're going to shout those out. But Phoenix people, Arizona people, we have the Lunch and Learns. New Mexico's going to have stuff. We're going to go across the country.
Mike, tell us about the Lunch and Learns a little bit.
Basically, it's kind of like these webinars, but they're in person, which is kind of nice. And instead of just talking about, like we talked about compressed media and filling pots, if this was a Lunch and Learn, we would have hydrated some blocks. We would have filled some pots with different types of media and aggregate and timed ourselves. We would have had fun. So basically, it's like this webinar, but a practical application session of it, where we go over the products physically and let you try them out.
Yeah, like live in person in Phoenix, right? At our Phoenix store?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Hands-on educational sessions.
Yes, sir. And Joe, I look forward to meeting you either on the next webinar or this summer when we're filming out there on the East Coast. We've got some pretty amazing cultivation facilities we're going to be heading out and getting to tour and do some behind the scenes filming. And I think that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you everyone for attending. Be on the lookout for the follow-up email, everyone. It'll have all of our contact information. And if you need any help with any of your commercial cultivation needs or even home grow stuff, these guys are willing to help out. They're very generous a group of guys here that are with their time. So I think that's gonna be it, guys. I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks
Thanks
Mark.
so much.
Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys, take care.